Welcome to the 409th episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. Well, the third annual Odyssey SwimRun Austin is in the books. We lived. A couple things different this year. The course was changed. It's in a state park. It's a Girl Scout state park called Pace Bend. And the river around it, the Colorado River, goes around, and the water level was down 43% this year. I guess last year it was down in the 20s. This year it's down 43%. And it's hard to believe how much of a difference that makes. The way the geography of the park is, there are rolling hills. It's actually in the hill country of Texas. And so there are kind of rock faces that go down into the water and kind of straight down in. So typically when you get to the edge of the water and you get in, it gets deep very quickly. But with the water being down, there's a lot more rock exposed. So it meant a lot more rock climbing in and out of the swim. The difference turned out to be a little bit longer, 15.68 miles on my watch last year, 16.7 miles on the watch total this year. Probably a little less than 3 miles of swimming. So you're in and out, in and out, in and out. Swim, run, swim, run, swim, run. There's 6 swims, 7 runs. The last run's real short, up to the finish line, about half a mile. So we did, time-wise, worse, but place-wise, better. So we were the 27th team out of 40 teams. So that was good. In years past, if you've listened to this, we had to fight our way into the bottom. So we did much better. We ran better. Certainly felt like I ran better. Having done more trail races, it's funny to see the trail that we thought was so rocky and technical not be that bad after all. So there were some sections when you're running that it's rocky. There's some roots. It kind of curves around a little bit, but by no means is it as technical as what we've been on, especially when we compare it to the Leadville Marathon. So running was better. Felt much more comfortable on the trails. So that's good. We're getting better at running trails. We hadn't been in the water. I think Michael might have been in the water a little bit more than I was, but my pool has been closed for over a month since Hurricane Ian, so I hadn't been in the water. And my plan was, after the last marathon, to dedicate a little bit more time to swimming, which didn't happen. Of course, we had not had our wetsuits on since the last year's SwimRun event, so that makes a difference. We wear a short wetsuit, so it's short sleeves and short, so it's not a full wetsuit. It's not as thick. It's certainly more, it's lighter weight, so you can run in it, but it nevertheless is more restrictive than just swimming in a bathing suit, so that was a little bit different. Of course, I've been doing the pull-up challenge, and so I was hoping that all the upper body work that I have been dedicated to have been doing would pay off and make up for the lack of swimming that I had done. It didn't really translate out that way. No matter what people tell you as far as training goes, cross-training helps overall fitness, but it's no substitute for the actual sport you're going to be doing. So, you see run plans that you can only run 3 days a week and you can run a marathon and then you can cross-train. And a lot of times people think that that's going to be that, you can just kind of slide your way through a marathon, and that never happens. And this is the same way. Even though I was doing the weight workouts with my arms, it wasn't near the same motion by any stretch of the imagination as swimming, especially those distances. So my arms got tired this year, and my stroke wasn't as fluent, and I thought that was a lot of the reason why our time was slower. But I went back and did some calculations, and turns out if you look at our swimming times per 100 yards, on the Garmin watch, so to speak, we were maybe, 5 to 10 seconds slower per 100. So that didn't really translate out to a big time period over the whole, kit and caboodle. So there were 6 swims. The real difference was getting in and out of the water. And so 6 swims means 6 entrances and 6 exits. So we ran faster when we were running, but there were these dead spots where we were climbing down into the water through the rocks and climbing out of the water through the rocks. And the first swim, we actually climbed into the mud and got stuck there for a little bit before we got going. So it took a while to get, again, our rock climbing skills, mud slinging skills honed in. We went down to see the course the day before the race, and we did see one exit, and they had pink ribbons marking the course, and they had a line of sight, which would be the best way out, so to speak. By no means was there a path. So this is all natural rock, mud, bushes, habitat. So nothing is, there's not a trail out of the water. It's, pick the best line of sight that you think you can do. So sometimes the rock, it would be stepping up 3 or 4 feet over one boulder to the next. Sometime it would be picking your foot placement between, 3 or 4 1-foot round, somewhat movable rocks. So again, not our forte. And certainly when you have to go to work the next week, you pick your spots a little bit. So we were more about let's be safe than let's, get a lot of time. So we lost most of our time. The difference between last year, 4 hours and 48 minutes versus 5 hours and 17 minutes, was mostly due to getting into the water and getting out of the water. So, that is what it is. I don't think that is something we can improve a whole lot on. It just is what it is. We're just not that technical of rock climbing. Now, what does make a difference is mobility. So I do believe that the reason why we pass people that we haven't passed in the past years was that we ran faster when we were running. We didn't swim faster than anybody else, but I do believe that we got through the rocks better than some other people. And mobility is a huge thing. I talk about it on the podcast. I do work on that, getting up from the floor without using my hands, working on hip mobility, stretching. And I have been dedicated to doing that. And I think that's really important, to do on a regular basis. And that certainly came in handy. It was just more a fear of falling and breaking your neck or a compound fracture that slowed us down more than anything else. I guess the only way to simulate something like that would be do bear crawls up and down box jump boxes and, up and down the stairs and various places. So who knows? Maybe we'll have to get with Jenny McCall from the Ninja Warrior that I had on the podcast and devise a pseudo swim exit over boulders and obstacles. Who knows? So you carry your nutrition in the wetsuit or on a little pouch that's a belt that's you hook your swim paddles on. So if you're not familiar with this race, you wear your wetsuit to run. You swim in your shoes. You use paddles to swim, and you carry those or hook them onto a belt after you're done. And you have a swim buoy that you have tied onto your leg that you rotate around to use as a flotation device because you can't kick because you have your shoes on. And you have a swim cap that you're required to wear when you're swimming. You can take it off if you want when you're running. And, of course, you have goggles. So there's a fair amount of equipment as opposed to just going out and run. We use gels for nutrition. You carry, I really like this trails when, there's no cups. You're given a silicone cup. We've collected several of these over the years at various trail races. I think this is a much better idea. I think they should do this for road races. to get rid of all the waste. But we have a silicone cup, so when you get to the aid station, you fill up your own water cup. You can drink as much as you want. Typically, we get a glass. It's probably, one of the baby, 7 ounces maybe. Get one of those and take it on the way and have a gel. So we were pretty good about taking our gels more on a regular basis than in the past, because you get kind of caught up in swimming, running, getting in, getting out, and so we were more aware of when we should take nutrition. The water was better on the course in the past, again being towards the back. They ran out of water in the past years. This year they had, I think, a couple more stops where they had water, so that made hydration better. So we're getting better. We learned last year that you unzip your wetsuit, then you can breathe better. You take that layer off. And this year we even took our swim caps off at the end when it started to heat up. The weather was about 50s in the morning. It was a little cold the first couple swims, and then it heated up in the afternoon. It probably got into the high 70s, low 80s. So we took the swim cap off the last couple of runs. And, it was like getting a little air conditioning. So that helped. I did a post on Instagram. I wore Newton trail shoes. They're not as bulky and as knobby as a lot of other trail shoes, and I was a little bit concerned that when they talked about the mud and the rocks that they may not be grippy enough, but they did just fine. So I was really happy about those shoes. I've worn the Newton trail shoes in the ultras that I've done as well, so that all worked out good. I will give a big shout out to Exoskin. That's Xoskin socks. No blisters or anything. And that first entrance into the water, we sunk to just below our knees in mud. So we took in a lot of mud in our shoes and yuck and into our socks. And so when we finished, the socks and shoes inside were nasty. But I never had one blister or hot spot on my feet. So, again, it was only about 15 miles of running and 3 miles of swimming, so to speak. And so not a lot long distance, but your feet are wet the whole time. The socks were soaked, the shoes were soaked. So shout out to those socks for being really good as far as wicking and not causing any problems. Because it was at a Girl Scout camp, there's a mess hall at the camp head, and so we got to go there before the race, and so stay warm. And they even had breakfast. I always have a bunk bar and a banana before a race, but they had oatmeal, they had waffles, they had all kinds of things for people's families. So that was really nice. Had a cup of coffee. I always do that. Again, had gels during the race. After the race, I didn't check. I'll have to check if the race director, but I have a feeling that somebody in the race family is either vegetarian or vegan, because they had a lot of vegan options. They had baked potatoes, they had quinoa, 2 different kinds of quinoa, one with onions and corn and peppers. They had corn tortillas as well as flour tortillas with refried beans, as well as a pulled pork option. But then they had salsa and peppers and tomatoes. So it was really a good variety for people that were plant-based. So that was pretty cool. Never can usually get things like that after a race. The SwimRun venue was also really nice and really different because, again, you start out and you run 1.5 miles and you swim so many yards, and you run 3 miles and you swim so many yards. And so you're in and out. And, by the time I actually scrolled through my watch, the Garmin has a SwimRun program on it, which I screwed up royally. You hit the lap button to change from swim to run, and I screwed that up on numerous occasions. But also have the ability to look at the total time. And by the time I scrolled through and looked at the total time, we were already 3 hours and 40 minutes into the race. And it seemed like we had just really started. We're counting the swims and the runs and knew how many, and I had the times, or I had the distances on my paddles. But I just got to say, the day went really, really fast. And, you don't feel like you ran, over a half a marathon in distance. You don't feel like you're swimming that big a distance. Although the last one, I got to say, I did feel like I was swimming. I keep, in my head, you can do more than you think you can. And, so I figured, well, I got 20 more minutes in the water here, and, anybody can do anything for 20 minutes, and you're looking for the buoys, as you go. And, like I said, my arms and my shoulder blades were getting a little tight and a little crampy, but never had to stop, never had to rest, just plug on. And I have to say that my swim stroke, and I felt more comfortable as we went on. And, again, I was happy to see that we weren't as slow as I wasn't as slow as I thought I was, this year compared to last year. So that's pretty good. This race was, more about having fun and getting to go through Houston to visit family. So I don't think that it's ever going to be something that we can really train extensively for. I don't think my local county pool would like me swimming with my shoes on and my wetsuit and getting out and running around the pool and getting back in. We could go and swim in the ocean and I suppose run around, but it's usually too complicated for that. And, there's a bunch of other things to deal with. And I'm not a huge fan about swimming in the open ocean water anymore with some of the red tide and stuff like that happened. So, we're probably not get this down to a science, but it sure is a lot of fun. And, it has all the aspects. We get to swim, we get to run, we get to practice trail running, we get to practice our mobility. So it's a great group of people. The race director is very, very nice. It's a nice atmosphere, nice location. So I think we'll continue to do those as long as they'll have us. I was a little sore after the race, especially my shoulders. I felt like I'd been doing a farmer's carry for a couple miles, and I was sore on the arms the next day or so, and even in my legs because, like I said, because it's short runs, didn't really run to heart rate, kind of ran as hard as we could for the technical aspects of it. And when I looked back on my heart rate, I was pretty much up around 85% predicted max heart rate most of the running. So you get into a little lactic acid production. So I had a little soreness for a couple days, but came back and started back in with running with Sophie. So just running easy, little 3.5, 4 miles. And back to the pull-up challenge because I got to get that pull-up challenge. We took Caleb to the park while we were in Houston, and of course they had monkey bars, and got to do work on my pull-up there a little bit and come across the monkey bars a little bit. So it's getting better. It is getting better. I don't have a complete pull-up, but I'm getting more on that front end, that initial starting point, and certainly when I get started, I can pull myself up and I can hold there. So I'm going to get it. I'm going to keep working on it. So I have a renewed respect for upper body strength and keeping that going. And I think that I was kind of fooling myself that my upper body strength was better than it was from doing just chores of daily living. So I intend to work and keep that going. As far as recovery goes nutritionally, I am still, I've said it before, and I still am a huge proponent of fruit after a hard workout. We went to the local supermarket and got a big container of watermelon and had that. We actually had it before the race, a container, and after the race, a container. We had some cucumbers, fresh salads and things. So raw vegetables and a lot of fruit, as well as hydrating with water, I think is a great way to recover. And you got to get the glycogen back in your muscles. And when you're doing that, vitamin C in the watermelon helps to get the soreness out, the anti-inflammatory properties of fruit, but mainly getting the sugar back in with the glycogen in a simple way without having to fight with complex carbohydrates or anything, I think is really a key to getting things back together quickly. I want to transition into a little bit about atrial fibrillation again. I think a lot of people had some questions on atrial fibrillation in the past and were interested in hearing about it. It's certainly the most common arrhythmia that people experience. The risk factors for atrial fibrillation being hypertension, valvular heart disease is the two biggies, but being overweight, alcohol intake, or excessive alcohol intake. But that being said, sometimes people have atrial fibrillation and they convert out of it, or they get an ablation, and so they're back into a regular rhythm. Sometimes they're in and out of it. Sometimes they can feel when they go into the atrial fibrillation and back into a regular rhythm. Sometimes it happens once or twice a year, once or twice every couple of years, then it can happen more frequently. And sometimes people ultimately are in atrial fibrillation chronically, and that typically happens more in an older population. And if you're anticoagulated, so you're on a blood thinner, being in atrial fibrillation poses no increased risk of death versus not being in atrial fibrillation. The most important thing is to be on that blood thinner to prevent what we call embolic events or strokes. But then it comes down to how much exercise can people do and how much exercise should they do. And again, we know that having good cardiovascular health also is protective against having arrhythmias or having decreased blood flow issues. So certainly we want to maintain, a good cardiovascular, healthy lifestyle through exercise. We also want a normal body mass index. We want to control blood pressure mainly through diet, because if you're just taking a medication that slows your heart rate down or dilates blood vessels, that is not necessarily physiologic, and there have some side effects to that on the backside. So if you can get your blood pressure down by, changing your breathing, changing your salt intake, and exercise, weight loss, it's a much better way to go than just saying, okay, my blood pressure is controlled on medication. So if you can get your blood pressure under control and the body mass index under control, the risk of atrial fibrillation goes down. But sometimes, people are already in atrial fibrillation for a long time before they ever, anybody tells them, or they come to that conclusion, and they might not be able to get out of atrial fibrillation. It happens. And again, it tends to happen in an older population. And when you exercise and you're in atrial fibrillation, because your heart is not beating regularly, it's actually described as being irregularly irregular. So it's kind of a dump, 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 dump. It's all over the place. The top chamber doesn't prime the ventricle with a little bit of a squeeze at the end. So there's not quite the stretch of the left ventricle to cause as vigorous of a contraction with every beat. So it varies. Some of the beats that are close together won't be as forceful of a heartbeat, won't have as much blood flow from the heart as beats that the heart has a little bit more time to fill with blood. So it's kind of like walking up a muddy slope, and that it can be a little tricky, and people can get out of breath. And it can be a little unnerving because, things that didn't cause you to be out of breath, now all of a sudden you're out of breath when you do them. And again, some people don't notice it as much as others. But nevertheless, most people, if they can't feel the irregularness, they can feel that just not quite the stamina that they had before. So the question is what to do about it. Should people not exercise or should people exercise? And there was a recent study published in the Journal of American Medical Association that actually looked at training people that are in chronic atrial fibrillation. Now, it was a really small study, but I think that it was an encouraging study. They had, and what they compared was high-intensity intervals versus continuous moderate to vigorous activity. So you may have heard of high-intensity intervals, if you've went to a gym or something and people tell you lose more weight and you get in better shape quicker if you do these intervals. So people will, do a high heart rate, heavy exertion for 1 or 2 minutes and then recover and then repeat it and do that for a shorter period of time than, say, just go in and walk on a treadmill for an hour. And so that's exactly kind of what they did. They did 8-minute segments where they had people push their heart rates to 80 to 90% of predicted maximal heart rate. And then they were 30 seconds long, and then they would have rest. And so they did this for 28 minutes. So so 8 minutes of vigorous, or 30 seconds of vigorous high intensity, and then recover. And they did 2 8-minute segments out of that 23 minutes. So the rest of it was kind of recovering, catch your breath. The other group they exercised continuously for 60 minutes on the treadmill at a moderate to vigorous pace. So they were huffing and puffing, but they were never getting their heart rate greater than 85% for the most part. And it was on perceived exertion. So it was on a scale of 20, it'd be like 12 to 16. So you're working hard, you're huffing and puffing a little bit, but you're certainly not straining. And so when they compared those two groups as far as the outcome, and the outcomes they used were quality of life measures. How do you feel? Do you feel better when you do activities of daily living or go for walks and such? Or the other one was how far can you get on a 6-minute walk test? Now again, this was a study that was relatively short. They exercised 2 times a week for 12 weeks, so 3 months. And so they did the 6-minute walk test before, did the questionnaire, then they did the 6-minute walk test and the questionnaire afterwards. And what they found basically was both of them showed a little bit of improvement in the 6-minute walk test and perceived exertion and quality of life. One was not better than the other, but both were pretty safe. There wasn't any significant difference in the small group. There were 9 people, so slightly more people stopped in the high-intensity training group. Somebody had a knee injury, somebody got diagnosed with Parkinson's, somebody fell, somebody had a valve replaced, somebody was short of breath, there was a GI bleed, somebody, and the 2 in the other group, 1 person died, 1 person had a bypass. So, and the age group was, an older age group, and the body mass index was 30 versus 29. So these people were overweight, older, and had chronic atrial fibrillation, yet they had some improvement in their 6-minute walk test, and actually it was 59 yards further. It doesn't seem like a lot, but for a short duration, again, the outcomes were people felt better, and both groups improved. So the takeaway, I would say, was, people should be encouraged if you have chronic atrial fibrillation, and it just shows how important it is to keep moving. When you move, you improve the blood flow to your legs, you improve the muscle, which improves muscles in your legs, which improves the blood flow back to your heart. So you support your blood pressure. The more you exercise, the more your baseline heart rate will go down. So your cardiac function will improve. You'll deliver more blood per beat because your heart has more time to fill. And typically when you have a lower heart rate at rest, it doesn't ramp up quite so fast, so that people that may have an irregular heartbeat, they don't get this, very high ramped up heart rate when they exert themselves. So being in better condition is better for atrial fibrillation, as well as people that aren't in atrial fibrillation. And, it'd be nice to see a longer study and see people train longer. It would be nice to see people train more often and see that training effect. But again, if you have chronic atrial fibrillation, that doesn't mean you have to sit in a chair for the rest of your life, and certainly it's not encouraged. Whether you do high-intensity intervals or a continuous moderate to vigorous physical activity, the recommended American Heart Association activity, 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity a week. Whether you replace that with high-intensity training is up to the individual. Some people like to push it and then come back, and do intervals. They just like SwimRun. You do something different. It makes the time pass a little bit more, especially if you're going to be limited to being inside in a gym on a treadmill. Other people, they go outside, might enjoy, more of a moderate to vigorous continuous walk. So if you're walking with your dogs. But the bottom line is it really doesn't matter. One's not better than the other. It's the biggest thing that matters is consistency. So it is really important to do things on a regular basis, not intermittently. The thing that I don't like about high-intensity interval training for a lot of people is that you have a little bit more pounding, a little bit more risk of injury, especially if technique and form is not good. So that's where I think that the more moderate to vigorous activity on a continuous basis is a little bit better. But again, it's up to the individual. We have now officially entered into eating season, just going past Halloween, now heading into Thanksgiving in the near future. This is a scary time of the year for people that tend to overeat, or, you become exposed to things that aren't plant-based. If you go over to drdulaney.com and sign up for our newsletter, we'll be sending out a newsletter of what we eat for Thanksgiving and some Thanksgiving recipes. But, I am a huge proponent of continuing on your steady diet. With the holidays, people start to go to parties and overeat. But I think it's really important to stick to your diet and exercise program that you've had all year long. Start thinking about what you've had in the past for Thanksgiving and what you can do for Thanksgiving, and try some of the dishes and try them on and see how you like them. There's a lot of different recipes out there for, there's a company that makes a field roast, but you can make your own. So it's kind of like a lentil loaf, or you can make a loaf with seitan. You have it on the table. I think early in a plant-based nutrition lifestyle, you take away the turkey and you take away the ham, and people start to panic that they're not going to make it, or they're going to go off because they're going to have that stuff. You're really going to be much healthier without it. The salt load with the ham, the bacteria load with the ham or turkey, mainly with the turkey. The ham is usually so salty, you could probably drop it in the toilet and you wouldn't get anything bad from it. But turkeys are associated with some of the highest incidence of food poisoning. And then if you think people stuff that turkey and all the hands that were involved, it's just a dirty, greasy mess. So you're not missing anything out. So you're better off going with a seitan loaf or a lentil loaf or more vegetables. So start planning those. We always do sweet potatoes. We do mashed potatoes and mushroom gravy. We do a variety of different dishes with cranberries. I am sprouting more. I'm getting into sprouting. And actually next week I'm going to have Doug Evans, who wrote the Sprout book, on the podcast to talk about the benefits of sprouting. We're going to be doing one of his recipes in his book in class tomorrow with the roasted carrots and sprouts. I'll let you know how that is, and maybe we'll include that even in our menu, depending on if the nutrition class gives a thumbs up. So, I think that's the way to go. Pumpkin pies are certainly plant-based if you make them with silken tofu and pumpkin. The crust is usually where people, there's a lot of extra calories there that you don't really need. So think about doing more of a tart bowl, or, in the little dishes, the pumpkin pie filling. That's always the way to go. Pumpkin muffins, pumpkin oatmeal, cranberries, cranberry-based oatmeal. So there's lots of things to do in the fall to change things up. Butternut squash curries, stuffed various stuffed squashes. So you can really make a lot of really pretty dishes. I think presentation is key to actually feeling good about what you're eating. So start practicing. This is a good time to start trying out different dishes as we go into Thanksgiving, and then you can hone it in as you go into Christmas. Do not let up on your exercise. Keep that going. Keep your routine going. Because there's nobody out there that can skip a few days and not kind of fall by the wayside, or skip a few more, and it becomes a very intermittent habit. And we know as you get older, you can lose muscle mass very quickly, and it's much harder to put it on. And even if the person at the gym tells you you're putting on muscle and not fat, it's not true. For the most part, it takes 6 to 8 months of vigorous training to put on muscle. So it doesn't happen overnight, or certainly in a 2-week course. So keep that in mind, but keep going in your routine. Make sure you carve that time out, even if you're traveling, that you have to have your exercise in. You'll feel much better about it. Sign up for a turkey trot. You still have time to train. You can walk it. That's always good. And sign up for another race. Sign up for the jingle and jog. Sign up for stuff in the spring. So get a bunch of things signed up. I know we have, a full lineup. We'll be going to California International Marathon in December. February, we have a 50-miler. March, we have our Stewart Marathon, the Treasure Coast Marathon in Stewart, Florida. I hope they didn't have too much damage with this Nicole hurricane that just went through. We'd love for you to join us at that marathon. It's not too late. It's in the first weekend of March. It's again a Treasure Coast Marathon in Stewart, Florida. So we'll have a group of people there running together and having a great, it's a nice venue, a nice hometown small race. So keep races on the calendar, keep motivated, try out your Thanksgiving recipes, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.